Sunday afternoon. It's blustery outside. I'm actually holding my camera. I was making a video for you, and the camera was set up on a table in front of me, and the wind blew it over. There was a candle holding it up, and the wind blew the candle over. The jar crashed. So this is the second time going through to say hi to you. It won't be as steady because I am holding it, but I'll try and give you as good a view as I can. I can move the camera around a little bit to show you where I am. I'm in my backyard. That's the view of the mountains behind me. Okay, really, really beautiful. Lovely day. And right about behind the grape arbor over that hill, that's where Allison and Helen Miller live. Last week they were out flying a kite, and that was kind of neat. They were having a good time with that. And I wanted to update you about what some of the rest of you were doing over the last week, folks who have contacted me. Emmett went out shooting with his dad, and they each caught a turkey. Emmett's was bigger than his dad. Good job, Emmett. Tristan has perfected his blowgun, and he now he put sticky tack on the front of his darts, and he sticks a nail in the sticky tack, and when he blows that thing through his blow dart, it has such force it sticks in the barn door. So that's a pretty powerful little weapon there. I told him he needs to be careful with that. Emma and her sibling, on the same day we were talking about making catapults, those two were building a catapult, and they didn't perfect theirs quite yet, and so I'm not sure if they're still working on that, but they switched gears a little bit, and they built a 3-person gigantic water balloon launcher. And so it takes 3 of them to pull that balloon back and launch it over the hill. Anya has been watercoloring a big selection of cards with her siblings. They want to give those to people who are shut in right now. And Sean has been dutifully working in his man cave. He's got it furnished now. Quite nice setup he's got. And he actually built a wall down there. He wanted a nicer surface, I guess, against his basement wall. So he built a wall. Impressive job, yeah. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about this week. Okay, so some of you have coats and a few other things either in the back closet or in your lockers. But the coats, the lockers, the closet, it's not labeled. I don't know whose things are there. So sometime this summer, when you get a chance and you're there with your parents, stop in, look in your locker, get your stuff out, and then check in the closet in the room if it's open, and you can get those things. I'm not going to put them in the lost and found. I want you to find your things, okay? Also, this is the week to return your math book and your science book. You've already finished your math, and you're going to finish science on Tuesday with your last test there. So get back to me, all your books, your science tests. You don't need to turn in anything else this week, just the books and the science test for me, and then whatever you owe your other teachers. You may keep your history book for another week because I think you're still going to need that. And if you have any other books from school, get those in, okay? All right, many of you, I looked at the YouTube channel where I posted last week's story, and I saw that there were 35 views. That meant that not only did you guys listen to that story once, you listened to it twice, some of you, lots of you, most of you. And so I thought I might read you another story. It seems like maybe you like having a story. Now, it's going to be awkward for me to read a story when I'm holding the phone, but I'll do my best. I may not make the best eye contact, but we'll give you a good shot at a story. Okay? Just like last week, this story may count for your reading time. So you don't need to put in an hour of reading on the day that you listen to this video. You can listen to the story as your reading time and go put a check mark on your paper and write down that you had the story from Mrs. McGurrin. I'm going to read to you from this book, Just Plain Becky. This is the book I wrote about my life and my children's life. That is me on the front cover. Do I look like me? See, that's me when I was 5. And kind of cute, huh? Everybody starts out pretty good. And then that's me a little later. Looks a little bit more like me that you're used to. I had glasses on in that picture, but they're different kind of glasses. But that's me maybe 10 years ago. And so I'm going to read to you a story about when my children were little. I was a homeschooling mom, so you know what that's like right now. So this was the winter, and I was home with my 4 children. And I'm going to read to you the chapter called... Oh, I'm sorry. No, I picked a different chapter. I was going to read a little one chapter. I'm going to read the chapter when they were older, and all 3 boys had joined the rescue squad. This is back in West Virginia. Go over those hills there. Go 7 mountains. Go over 7 mountains. and you will get to where this story took place in Pocahontas County, West Virginia. So here I'm going to start reading. Hope the wind doesn't take our pages away. This is chapter 24 in the book, To the Rescue. My children were not children anymore. Megan had moved to Indiana as soon as she was sure I was well enough to make it on my own, and she was now engaged to a sweet, godly man named Devon Chuck. The boys, in the meantime, were rapidly working their way into adulthood. They were no longer content to rescue imaginary damsels from ancient Celtic possums. Now they wanted to pull real people from mangled cars and battle burning buildings. So each boy got old enough and brave enough, he joined the fire and rescue squad. Colin, being the oldest, joined first. He quickly passed his training as both a firefighter and an emergency medical technician and signed on with the local rescue squad. He was given a radio to let him know when there was a call, and the device was so loud we could hear the dispatcher's voice from every room in the house. When that radio emitted his department's tones, whether it be during a meal or in the middle of the night, Colin grabbed his gear and flew out the front door. Of course, there wasn't always a car waiting for him in the driveway, but that didn't stop him. Just ask the neighbors. Valerie Lambert recounts the time she was enjoying the view of the snow-covered hills at the close of the day when she saw Colin burst out of the woods in full turnout gear, slide down the slippery hill, and leap the frozen streamlet beside the road to flag down the passing fire truck. Apparently, it had been faster to descend straight through the woods than to take the lane that wound more gracefully down our hill, and Colin didn't want to miss his ride. The truck dropped him off at the same spot a few minutes later. He headed up the lane this time. That's when Wendell and Laura bumped into him. I imagine the last thing they had expected to see on their moonlit stroll was a firefighter, complete with helmet and boots. Wendell cocked his head. Laura shook hers. "What are you doing?" they asked. "I was headed to a fire, but the call was canceled. They got it out before we got there." "Where's your vehicle?" "Dad's got it. His is in the shop." Laura shook her head again. Crazy. Colin made his way up to the house just in time to hear the tones go off again. It was a fully engaged house fire. He ran out the door a second time. No way was he going to miss this call. If Valerie was puzzled to see her young neighbor hail a passing fire engine less than an hour earlier, she must have been astounded to see him burst from the woods a second time to hail an engine going in the opposite direction. What was with these McGurrin boys? Little did she know it was their dream to fight the big fires, and they'd run a lot farther than a quarter mile through the snow to make sure they got there. Colin didn't return till after midnight, physically drained, grimy with smoke and sweat, and happy as all get out. It's not that the boys ever wanted someone's property to be destroyed or to have their lives in danger, but if there was a threat and someone needed rescuing, they just wanted to be in the thick of it. When Colin sped off to another house fire some months later, I listened in on the scanner. That was a mistake. At first, I heard only the garbled chatter of men moving equipment, setting up hoses, and deciding which firefighter would do which job. Then I heard them call Colin's number, 227, and tell him to go in. My heart rate increased. Were they actually going to let my son enter the burning building while it was still on fire? I leaned closer to the scanner. Suddenly, I heard the chief yelling, "Get out of there, 227! We've got fire in the attic! The whole thing's coming down!" I felt sick to my stomach. Nothing existed for me the rest of the afternoon but that scanner. I sat beside it, waiting for an update. More sirens, anything. But the radio was silent. No one was saying a thing. I began making funeral arrangements and imagining how I could mental funeral arrangements and began, lost my place here. I began making mental funeral arrangements and imagining how I could possibly survive the loss of my son. I didn't know until Colin walked onto the porch hours later that I had hugged his living form that the emergency radio transmissions in our area were sketchy. "Don't worry, Mom," he said with perfect nonchalance. "If something goes wrong, someone will call." I guess he thought I found his advice reassuring. Boys, I have to admit, unlike the boys, I prefer the more sedate calls, the gentler, safer ones. Like when the military helicopter slammed into the side of a snow-covered mountain during a bad ice storm with 17 men aboard. There were survivors, but but how many and what shape they were in was unknown. The site of the crash was in heavily wooded mountainous terrain, 3 miles from the nearest road, and the weather made help from the air impossible. That left the rescue to ground personnel, the local guys. Colin had graduated by then, and he was at work in the emergency department of the hospital when the news of the crash came over the scanner at the nurse's station. Man, he thought, I miss all the good ones. Please understand, when an emergency worker says good ones, he really means exciting ones, but we'll forgive them their expanded definition. Colin listened to updates throughout the night as his squad cut a trail from the north with a bulldozer, and other departments pushed through from the south on snowcats and snowmobiles they had borrowed from Snowshoe, the nearby ski resort. The snowmobiles got there first. The stranded men were cold, and they suffered from an assortment of nasty cuts and fractures. But thanks to the speedy rescue, all of them arrived at the hospital alive and in reasonably good condition. Colin wasn't going to miss out after all. Most of the injured men were transported to his emergency department. It's not every day that a 15-bed ER gets to treat 13 casualties at once, and from a helicopter. Now that was good. Nathan signed on as a junior member of the department a few months after the crash and became an official member 2 years later. First as an EMT, then as a firefighter. But even before he was allowed to do much more than observe, he tagged along with his older brother on almost every call. The majority of calls Nathan went on during his first few months were for emergency medical services. Diabetics with low blood sugar, heart patients with chest pain, elderly people who had fallen during the night, that sort of thing. And he was amazed to discover that medical calls can be as fascinating as house fires and helicopter crashes, especially when patients did the unexpected. He and Colin were both home when a call came in shortly after Nathan had gotten his first CPR card. It seems a man had pulled into his driveway and began honking his horn. Someone came out to see what all the noise was about and found the fellow leaning out of the car, looking as drained and lifeless as soft gray putty, or as pale as a ghost, as the old-timers like to say. Colin and Nathan rushed to the scene where they met up with Philip, another EMT, and Dave, who had shown up in the ambulance. For all his lack of color, the patient was conscious. He explained that he had been walking in the woods when he started to feel funny. Having had 3 heart attacks in the past, he suspected he was in the middle of a 4th. He had taken some nitro and made it back to his car, but this was as far as he could go. They lost no time in getting the man into the ambulance, and Colin, Philip, and Nathan all hopped into the back with him. Dave got behind the wheel. The hospital was a good hour away, but Dave could take the mountain faster than most, and according to those who have been thrown around in the back of his ambulance, he could make it in 35 minutes if the circumstances were right. This was a wilderness area after all, and rescue personnel didn't always feel as restrained by protocols as their more civilized counterparts. Dave floored it. They were still at the base of the mountain, and the patient was reclining in a half-sitting position when the heart monitor beeped. The man's eyes rolled back in his head. He groaned and then fell with a thud upon the cot. The man was in V-fib. His heart had become a mass of quivering muscle tissue, useless for pumping blood. "Step on it," Colin yelled. Dave complied. The ambulance, which had already been taking the curves faster than most sports cars could handle, accelerated. The men in the back jostled around like cargo pants in a tumble dryer. Everything was yelling, Colin, Philip, and the engines, the siren. Nathan stared in horrified silence as they shouted the man's name, slapped him, and rubbed their knuckles across his sternum. No response. Nathan prayed. "Compressions," Philip yelled. First Philip, then Colin, then Philip, then Colin, then Philip pushed repeatedly down on the man's chest and blew breath into his mouth. This was no CPR exercise. It was a real, living human being, and he was on his way out. 5 cycles of compressions already, and he was not responding. "Hook him up to the defibrillator," Philip yelled, telling Colin to get out the unit that would shoot electricity into the man's heart to make it stop quivering. It was a last resort. They could stop the man's heart with electricity, but there was no guarantee it would start pumping normally again. The man's body arched off the cot as a jolt passed through him, and his heart stopped beating completely. But it didn't start beating again. "Man," Philip said, and they began another round of CPR. Suddenly, the man sat up and began swinging his arms violently, punching anyone within reach. The EMTs wrapped their arms around his chest and held him to the cot until he regained his senses and calmed down. He looked at them, uncomprehending. "I can't breathe." Colin no sooner began explaining what was going on when the monitor beeped and the patient fell back on the cot a second time. How in the world? They administered another round of uncompressions, another electrical shock, and the man revived again. He sat up. What happened? The monitor beeped a third time, and he went down again. 3 times the cycle repeated itself. 3 episodes of VFib followed by CPR and defibrillation. Then they were at the hospital. Every responder in the ambulance felt the immediate drop of adrenaline that comes with seeing a team of doctors and nurses waiting to take over a difficult case. They had done their part. EMTs don't usually wait around after they deliver a patient, but this time they did. They couldn't rest until they knew if their guy was going to make it. And while it was satisfying to see the man get to the point where he could maintain a steady pulse, it was nothing like the elation they felt a few weeks later when their one-time patient, looking healthy and pink and a full 20 years younger, walked into the fire station during a meeting and shook hands with the men who had saved his life. That was a really exciting day for my sons. When Nathan turned 18, he felt confident enough to go on calls without Colin. It was kind of good to be out on his own, kind of big and grown-up-ish. So it wasn't surprising when, after a wrecker had towed a mangled BMW away from the guardrail that had kept it from flying off the hillside one foggy night, Nathan offered the 4 newly stranded travelers a ride. "Isn't there any place we could rent a car?" asked the one, a man in his mid-20s. Nate looked at the surrounding mountains and shook his head. "Nope." "Could we call a cab?" asked one of his companions, a man of about the same age, with a young couple by his side. Nate shook his head again. "Sorry. Closest place would be Elkins, and that's an hour behind you. They'd be closed now anyway. Where are you headed?" "Snowshoe." He could have figured as much. The luggage, the BMW. No one came to this part of the country in a BMW unless they were heading to the ski resort. "Aw," Nate said, "it's only a 40-minute drive. Might take a bit longer in the fog. Let me give you a lift." Judging by the awkward way his passengers hoisted themselves onto the runner board and climbed into the seats, he wondered if this was their first time in a pickup. "Say, this sure is nice of you," traveler number 1 said. Nathan grunted country style, all in a day's work. "You must have a lot of accidents around here," traveler number 2 said. "I never saw so many curves." Nathan grunted again. "Mostly tourists. Locals know how to take them. Now that guardrail back there, someone slams into that thing every month. All tourists. Like the 3 guys coming through on motorcycles a few months ago. Came around that curve too fast and wham! What was waiting for them in the middle of the road but a deer? One of them smacked right into the side of her. Good deer, too. Responders skunned that baby on the spot, and each of them took home a chunk for their deep freeze." The girl put her hand over her mouth. Traveler 1 feigned disregard. "I've heard about that sort of thing. Good way to get meat." How far is it?" the girl asked after they had been driving through the fog for what must have seemed like hours. "You sure we're on the right road?" "Oh, yeah, I used to work up here. Got a great fire department." Nathan took the next curve with a little pep, causing his passengers to lean into each other's shoulders. "I'll bet," Traveler 2 said. They got to the top of the mountain a little past midnight. Not bad timing, Nathan thought, knowing it would take him another hour to retrace his path and climb into his bed. When he pulled up before the lodge, his passengers exited the truck a whole lot faster than they had hopped in. "Thanks a bunch." "Yeah, thanks." Nathan nodded. "Have a good one." Lest you think Evan sat on the sidelines while all this rescuing was going on, we must have one last hero story. It involves a truck full of diesel fuel, a bridge over the Greenbrier River, and a line of backed-up traffic that badly needed advice on how to handle the delay. For years, Evan had watched his brothers run out the door every time the tones sounded, and he had listened to their stories when they got back. And he got to thinking, why am I just sitting here when people out there may be needing me? He was pretty certain he didn't want to run into burning buildings, and absolutely positive he didn't want to stuff people's insides back inside their insides. But there was no reason why he couldn't learn to drive the ambulance, deliver water bottles, or direct traffic. So Evan signed on to the department. He had already earned his CPR card and first aid card, just so he would be prepared in case the unthinkable happened, and was waiting for a driver's class to come to our end of the country when the tones went off. A tanker had slammed into the abutment on the Bartow Bridge not 2 miles from our house, and it was engulfed in flames. Condition of the driver? Unknown. Thick black smoke was already billowing above the tree line as Nathan and Evan pulled out of the driveway. In all likelihood, they would be the first responders on the scene. They found the bridge blocked by the overturned truck, but could see the driver walking around on the other side of the river. Apparently, he had gotten himself out of the cab before the flames began melting into the pavement. The river was thankfully both narrow and shallow this time of year, so Nate scurried down the bank and forded the stream to see if the man was all right. Evan took his post on the road, telling each driver as he approached the bridge that the five-way intersection was closed in all directions and would be for several hours. The fire was hot and uncontained, and it was going to take a lot of equipment to get it under control. Then he offered them suggestions for ways they might detour around the scene. Most drivers thanked him for his help and either set out in search of an alternate route or turned off their cars and got out to watch the fire. Flaming diesel was pouring into the river, and most of them had never seen a river ablaze. Evan had worked his way back the line of 20 or 30 stopped cars when he was met by one of those people who thinks that rules are made up for the other guy. The driver began pulling into the left lane as though he were going to pass the line of stopped cars when Evan walked up to his window. "I'm sorry, sir," he said in his friendliest tone. "My instructions are not to let any cars pass that white building." "Isn't the fire on the bridge?" "Yes, sir, the fire is on the bridge, but the intersection is blocked and we're not letting people through." "That's okay, I'm just turning left. I can get through." "I'm sorry, sir, but the intersection is closed in all directions." "But I'm just going to Arbavale. I just need to make a left and I'll be out of your hair." "You could wait to have the fire cleaned up and open the road again. That'll take hours. Or you could head back through Virginia and go around through Frost." The man pulled out his cell phone as if drawing a weapon. "This is a passing zone. You can't stop me from passing here. If you don't let me through, I'll call the police and get permission." Didn't he realize he was in the quiet zone? There was no cell service back there, so his phone was useless. Evan smiled. "I wish you would, sir." Finally, the man backed up, turned around, and sped off the way he had come. Hopefully, he had decided to work his way around through Frost. 3 hours later, when the line of cars had grown to a mile long and Evan was exhausted from standing all that time in the sun, the man returned. "You still here?" the driver said in disgust. Evan smiled and nodded his head. "Yes, sir." "You gonna let me through yet?" "No, sir." "But I'm just going to Arbavale." "I understand that, sir, but the intersection is closed in all directions." "Can I at least go up there and bring back a police officer so he can talk some sense into you?" "No one is allowed to pass the White House." Just then, a patrol car approached from the intersection, and the officer in the driver's seat handed a bottle of icy water to Evan. "Hey, buddy, you need one of these?" Evan grabbed the bottle with a smile and opened it immediately. "Thanks." "No problem." The driver saw his opportunity at last. "Hey, officer, can I get through here? I'm just heading to Arbavale." The officer gestured toward Evan. "What did he tell you?" "He says the intersection's closed." "He's right, and you should listen to him." Evan tipped his head back and took a big gulp of water. Yep, there was definitely a place for him on the department. And that ends the chapter. Okay, if you want to read more stories like this, they're in the book Just Plain Becky. I believe our library at school has it. Although I got a feeling now that I've read you a chapter, you're all going to want to take out the book at the same time. So you're going to have to take turns. One thing, if you borrow it, be kind and just keep it for 2 weeks. Read it and get it back so other people can see it too. Not pushing you to read it, but if you're interested, you want to make sure everybody has a turn. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too windy for you. I'm going to go inside and get a broom and sweep up the glass from the candle that broke. But that's okay, because I've enjoyed being with you. I look forward to seeing your moms at the homework exchange on Tuesday. And I want to encourage you to have a lovely, good, wonderful week. Your summer's coming. You're almost done. Hang in there, guys. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.